Gaelic Games Fan TV, Cork 726, Dublin 221. This is the match reaction. This is the match review. And firstly, look, you have to say fair play to Cork. They are a phenomenal team, an incredible team. And when you lose as a fan of the county that you support, look, it's very easy sometimes to be bitter. It's very easy to throw shade at the opposition or be disappointed in your own team's performance. And look, there certainly were elements of Dublin's performance yesterday that was a little bit off the pace. There's no question about that. I mean, look, to lose an All-Ireland semi-final by 20 points, of course, there would be performances in there that were not up to the standard that we've probably seen from Dublin at times this year. But I think for me, the real story is just how good Cork were. Cork were just absolutely incredible. Some of the goals, the way they cut through us, the way they played through us, the likes of Brian Hayes giving a performance for the ages, Alan Connolly, who, I mentioned in the preview show with Matthew saying, he's been a bit quiet this year, but he feels like this was the type of game where he could come alive in Croke Park and everything else. And it was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal from a Cork perspective. Tim O'Mahony as well was outstanding. And we just struggled to keep up with them. We couldn't live with them no matter what we did, no matter what we tried. We really, really struggled. Rob Downey had the performance of his life as well. Sean O'Donoghue was absolutely brilliant, I thought, in at number 4. Obviously, for us, it was the age all hit the ball up on top of John Heatherton and hope for the best. And probably maybe a little bit predictable. We obviously done that versus Limerick and got a huge amount of joy from it. But I think once we knew that John Heatherton was starting, that was always going to be the game plan. And Cork were dead wide to it. But it's a phenomenal Cork team. And look, if Cork do go and win the All-Ireland in a couple of weeks' time, which I think a lot of us would expect at this stage, for them to be this good and not win an All-Ireland again would be an incredible shock and an incredible surprise. And you'd have to hold it out to either Tipperary or Kilkenny, because it would be one of them teams that would beat them if that was the case. But we're looking at a team that, in my opinion, that could really, really dominate hurling. A bit like what we've seen from the likes of Limerick, from the Dublin footballers. Look, it's early days yet, and Cork have to get over the line first. That's the most important thing. You need to look at it from this year. But I was just watching them and thinking they are just an incredible side. Like the quick passing at times from the likes of Dara Fitzgibbon, Tim O'Mahony, the little flicks as well. I mean, that third goal from from Alan Connolly, he scores 2 goals in the space of 4 minutes. Like, just having the awareness and the confidence and the tenacity to actually go and do that, I thought was absolutely breathtaking. And look, from a Dublin perspective, we just couldn't live with it. We couldn't really get any momentum. I mean, the main thing was going into this game from a Cork perspective was at a bare minimum they had to match Dublin's energy and Dublin's intensity, because look, in the game it was clear as day when Dublin played Limerick that Dublin's energy and everything else, whilst there is a gap in quality between those two teams, I do think Limerick are the better team than Dublin in terms of quality. But they didn't produce it on the day. They were way off it. They thought they could just turn up and beat us, whereas Cork showed us the respect. They played us like they were playing a Limerick, like they were playing a Tipperary in an All-Ireland semi-final, as what would have been the case had Limerick have won the game a couple of weeks ago. So they were just phenomenal. Some of the points as well were incredible. I mean, Patrick Horgan scoring points over his shoulder. There was one moment in the second half as well where I think it might have been Mark Coleman who got a block. And Cork were like 15, 16, 17 points up at that stage. Mark Coleman got a block on one of the Dublin forwards. Declan Dalton picks up the ball from about 60 yards and pops it over the bar. And you're thinking, that is just absolutely incredible. Like, that is like to have that want and to have that sort of work rate, even when you're 15 to 16 points up in an All-Ireland semi-final, was just like fair play. And there was just no way that Dublin could compete with it. The likes of German Healy was brilliant. As I said, Declan Dalton was absolutely outstanding. Even getting the likes of Conor Lahan, Shane Kingston, like some of the players that Cork can bring off the bench as well, like being able to bring Conor Lahan and Shane Kingston off the bench when the game is done and dusted. Like, I mean, what else can you say about that? and there was just no way we could match them. Look, as I said, there were some, like, for Dublin, John Heatherton like scored a point. Look, it was very predictable what we were going to do there. It worked very well versus Limerick. Look, it was worth a go. But without question, he wasn't able to get the better of the Cork defence on this occasion. Ronan Hayes was quite quiet. Rian McBride comes off at half-time, wasn't really in the game. Donald Burke comes on, definitely looks a little bit leggy, gets a point, but you could tell there's still injury issues there. And we just struggled around the middle as well. Brian Hayes, Conor Donoghue, and like at times Dublin's shooting was probably actually better in this game than it was versus Limerick. But we just struggled to create chances. We struggled around the middle. We lost a lot of ball. There were probably moments in the second half as well where I think collectively we knew the game was gone and we struggled to sort of stick with Cork and kind of match their energy. And look, it's without question, being there at the game yesterday, look, it was 3/4 Cork fans, which was somewhat disappointing as a Dublin fan. You were hoping there'd be more turnout from Dublin fans. Now, whether that's because Cork fans got all the tickets before the Dublin fans, or whatever it was, I don't know. But it was, on the Nally, you were surrounded probably 6-1 by Cork fans. And that was, because every time Cork got a goal, like the fans would erupt. And I think it was mentally draining for Dublin. Like, probably as mad as this sounds, it did feel like an away game a little bit with the amount of Cork fans that were there. And look, fair play to them. Massive, massive support. The numbers that they brought as well up to Dublin. I heard a lot of people came up to Dublin and didn't even have tickets and were just watching the games in pubs around the county. So fair play as well. A tremendous support for their team. I think, look, one player you do have to commend is Cian O'Sullivan. 2 goals, 5 points. By far Dublin's best player. Big goal, what felt a big goal in the first half after Cork had got, 3 goals, 2 goals in the space of 2 minutes. We responded with an immediate goal ourselves, and you're thinking, right, we're back in it. We had that moment where we hit the bar as well. Like, what a massive, that might have been Fergal Whiteley who hit the bar. Like, that was a massive chance as well. If we had got that, look, I think Cork win the game regardless. They win the game regardless, but maybe we just find a little bit more within that moment. But no, like, this Cork team are absolutely phenomenal. It looks very hard that Kilkenny or Tipperary can stop them. We'll see what happens today in regards to that semi-final. We'll be back after that game as well. But it's a phenomenal team, an absolutely phenomenal team. Kieran Joyce as well, what a phenomenal hurler he is. And Shane Barrett, although he didn't score, like, he was at the center of everything. And the fact that he doesn't score and he can still win a game by 20 points, like, it just shows how good you were. Patrick Horgan as well was absolutely brilliant, some phenomenal. I know people look at Patrick Horgan and nowadays and think, he's getting all the points from frees and everything else, but some of the points from play were just absolutely brilliant. And he was absolutely phenomenal as well, it must be said. Jack O'Connor, who came off the bench scoring a point. I remember him being a real sort of starlet in the Cork side back in 2021, and you're able to bring him off the bench as well with a couple of minutes to go. So phenomenal performance from Cork. And look, from a Dublin perspective, it has been progress this year for Niall O'Callaghan's men to beat Limerick in the way that we did. Look, no one expected us to beat Cork. No one expected us to be able to beat them. Look, we certainly probably did expect it to be closer than 20 points, which was the disappointing thing. I did worry about goals. I said that in the preview show that Cork could cut us apart. And look, considering how brilliant defensively we were versus Limerick, we didn't concede any goals versus Limerick. But Limerick probably didn't work that many goal chances, which was surprising until they really needed to. But Cork just cut us time and time and, cut us apart time and time again. And it was a little bit disappointing at times how open we actually were, like leaving ourselves 2v2, like against this Cork side. You're just going to be absolutely bloodied and bruised doing that. But look, at the same time, do you blame management for adopting the same approach that they did versus Limerick, which worked? It beat Limerick. It beat one of the greatest hurling teams of all time. But the reality was Limerick were just miles off the pace that day. Like, don't get me wrong, Dublin were brilliant. Dublin deserved to win, but I'd be fairly confident if Dublin and Limerick played each other again, Limerick would probably win, and probably win quite comfortably, because Limerick wouldn't make the same mistakes again. At least you would think so. But look, it has been progress for Dublin. I think the most important thing for Dublin is to just find a bit more consistency. Like last year, competed very well against Kilkenny in the round robin in Leinster, beat Galway in the round robin in Leinster, then got absolutely hammered by Kilkenny in the Leinster final, then went and were very competitive versus Cork in the quarterfinals last year. Whereas this year, beat Limerick and then get a hammering by Cork, so it's just about trying to find those find that consistency in our performances against the top teams. Look, we are progressing. There are young players there. There's a huge amount of club success within Dublin, and Niall O'Callaghan, give him the time to really try and build something within this Dublin side, because I think he is a phenomenal manager, and we saw that with Nafina. And even to get us to this point in year one is progress. So, we just came up against a phenomenal team, and if Cork play like that in the All Ireland final, it could be a hiding as well. We all don't want that. And look, I don't want to be disrespectful to Tipperary or Kilkenny. I think they are two very good teams, and look, they are better than Dublin. But Cork are just next level, and it feels like the only two teams who could beat them this year were either Limerick or Clare. Clare have had an off year this year, obviously with winning it last year, and even drew with Cork, in the opening game. Limerick are gone, and probably nearly beat them in Munster, but nearly beat them in the round robin. Did beat them obviously, or nearly beat them in the final. Did beat them in the round robin. So there we are. Paddy says, I think we were out of our depth. Yeah, we were, to be fair. Richie says, I think Limerick let Dublin have too much space to run, but Cork do what Dublin do, but better. So Dublin's gameplay was unlikely to work. Yeah, and look, maybe in hindsight, Niall O'Callaghan can say, should we have tried something different? And I was watching his post-match kind of press conference, and he was basically saying, like, look, we knew the risks that we were gonna take, but we were ready to apply them, because look, it's got us to this point, so why should we change it? And did we expect Cork to have played as good as they did? Maybe not. I think we were all hoping that Cork would maybe fall into the same trap of Limerick a little bit. But it was very, like, even when it got in the second half, like, the game was over with about 25 minutes to go. And there never really felt like there was a moment. I mean, the game was probably over at half time, if we're being honest, but like, you were kind of hoping. You see this kind of very often in hurling sometimes, and Dublin are very good at this as well, where, a 12 to 13 point lead can be cut down very quickly to 5 or 6, and you get a bit of momentum. And you were hoping that after the goal from the second goal from Keane O'Sullivan, you were kind of thinking, if we get another goal here, we'll bring it down to 6, and maybe then it's on. But it just, it just never really happened, to be fair. Patrick says, can't wait for the final. It's been 20 years. Liam McCarthy coming home. Yeah, it's, look, as a Cork fan, you should be exuberant, buzzing, delighted. You just need to win that final now. And there's going to be massive pressure on Cork, massive expectancy. Look, I don't think the pressure has ever gotten to this Cork side necessarily. We haven't seen any evidence of that. So will there be nerves or whatever in the final? Maybe there might be, but as long as Cork just do what they do, they should win the final. The only thing I'd be worried about as a Cork fan, look, I do think Tipperary, I've predicted that Tipperary will win today, but I think if Kilkenny win today, they're like they're a bit more of a dangerous outfit, just because it's Kilkenny and it's the players that they have, and the big occasion, they can just step it up a little bit of a notch. That way, whereas Tipperary are a bit more of a younger team, although they have a few older lads in their team as well. I feel like they could get nervous as well in the final a little bit, and that might suit Cork. But look, we'll see what happens. Smart Parents says, I hope hurling can become more popular in the county. Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully it can rise and everything else, and there can be more of a buy-in. As I said, look, Cork have a phenomenal support, and maybe the tickets were taken early, season ticket holders and everything else, to be fair. But I was a bit disappointed with the turnout from Dublin fans. Like, looking around, like, I was at the very back of an alley, so I could see, very clearly and visibly the support. And it was, Cork massively outnumbered Dublin. And I've never really seen that. Look, obviously you're used to going to football games, and everything else. But I've never seen Dublin so massively outnumbered. But fair, look, the credit has to go to Cork fans there who brought some phenomenal noise and energy and everything else to the game. But yeah, look, fair play to Cork. Massive win for them. Man of the match, I think, would have to go to Alan Connolly. A hat-trick. You can't really dispute that. But Brian Hayes as well was phenomenal. Tim O'Mahony, Sean O'Donoghue. I mean, he could pick out so many players from a Cork perspective. But look, we'll be back after the Tipperary-Kilkenny game. Looking forward to that. Hopefully, it's a lot more competitive and, it's a much better sort of spectacle. Look, this game was still somewhat entertaining. 9 goals. A lot of goals. The first half was very enjoyable. But look, hopefully the second half can be a little bit better. And maybe to finish up, Acer says Cork was unstoppable. They were very, very hard to stop indeed. So yeah, cheers to anyone who did tune in. If you could hit the like button and subscribe, that would be appreciated. And commiserations to my fellow Dublin supporters. Congratulations to Cork. I think you probably win the All-Ireland from here.